Hello friends, welcome back to Dungeon Design in Zelda. As a first for this series, I'm actually joined today by a special guest, the legend himself, RMFH.
It's a pleasure to be here, Cap. Thanks for letting me tag along. I hope everybody enjoys today's video.
There's a bit of stuff to get through before we set foot into the next dungeon, so as usual, let's briefly summarize. Last time, we completed the Lake Bed Temple and collected the final fused shadow. However, our victory is cut short. Zant appears, kicks our butts, discarding the fused shadows that we worked so hard for, and reinstates the effect of Twilight, causing us to transform back into wolf form. He tries to recruit Midna to his side, but when she refuses, he dispels the Twilight, reviving the light spirit and forcing Midna to be exposed to the light energy, which mortally injures her. We're teleported out, and Midna, on the cusp of death, is only able to mutter to us that we need to reach Zelda. So we have to return to Hyrule Castle. To get there, we end up back at Telma's bar, with her cat Louise giving us a hint to go through the waterways. We'll also encounter Giovanni, who sold his soul for riches. And we're introduced to battling Pose, which will be important for the upcoming dungeon. After a stint through what I'm sure is the repurposed remains of an earlier build of some sort of beta dungeon, we'll make our way through the castle waterways, back up to the rooftops, and to Zelda. There's some exposition here as Midna asks that Zelda help us out. Zelda says that the Master Sword's power can cleave through the curse on Link, so we'll need to find that to return to Hylian form. Midna, happy with this, gives Zelda her final request, that she tell Link where to find the Mirror of Twilight.
Zelda, now understanding just who Midna is, decides instead to transfer her life force to the imp, essentially sacrificing herself to save Midna's life. With this transfer of life force, Midna is back at full strength and able to dwell in the world of the light without hiding in our shadow. Great. So now it's off to find the Sacred Grove per Zelda's instructions. We can return to Faron Woods, where we'll save this monkey again from these creepy puppet guys, and be told about an unexplored area beyond the ridge of the Forest Temple. We'll make our way over, and it won't be long before we find ourselves in the Lost Woods. After howling Zelda's lullaby by this howling stone, we'll be led through the woods by the Skull Kid, who annoyingly dispatches these puppets to attack us. But after some persistence, we'll find what seems to be the ruins of the Temple of Time. There's a short puzzle in which these guardian statues need to be led back to their stands, and the way forward will open, revealing to us the legendary Master Sword.
Just by touching the sword, the dark magic is expelled from Link, and he's able to successfully extract the blade from its pedestal. Iconic. Midna considers discarding the Shadow Crystal, but realizes that it could be advantageous to hang on to it so that we can transform back and forth to wolf form at will. With that done and the Blade of Evil's Bane in our hands, we can now seek out the Mirror of Twilight. Our first clue to finding it comes to us in the mail. We'll receive a letter from Telma telling us to come to her bar and meet with her freedom fighter gang of friends, which actually includes our old buddy Russell from Ordon. We'll be directed to meet one of their allies, Oru, who is at Lake Hylia investigating the Gerudo Desert. Oru tells us that the Gerudo Desert is home to the remains of a prison once built to house the worst criminals around, and that he believes it to be connected to the evils going on in Hyrule. He also hints to us that the Mirror of Twilight that we're looking for just might be found there. However, since the road to the desert is apparently impassable, he'll give us a note to pass off to Fire, who will use his cannon to launch us into the desert. When we arrive, Midna will offer us some more exposition regarding her tribe and home in the Twilight Realm. And then we're off to explore.
The Gerudo Desert is a massive open area with a number of noteworthy landmarks. For example, out at Gerudo Mesa, in the corner of the desert, we'll actually find the broken piece that was stolen from Elden Bridge. Otherwise, we can head north and we'll find ourselves at the Bulblin camp, which blocks the path to the Arbiter's grounds. We'll need to infiltrate the camp and find the key to the main gate, after which we'll actually have a third clash with King Bulblin. This time, no mounted combat or game of chicken, just the two warriors going toe-to-toe. Keep at him and use those hidden skills that you've learned, and you should be able to take him down. With that done, we can use one of these great boars to destroy the barricades and reach the dungeon.
Just a quick note before we head inside. There are a great deal of side quests and secrets that can be done before we reach here. In particular, 2 different hidden skills that can be learned via the Howling Stones by the Lost Woods and Lake Hylia respectively. You can also get 2 more bomb bags by freeing this Goron trapped in the volcanic rock in Zora's domain, as well as by completing the boat course minigame in Upper Zora's River. There's a bunch of other minigames to load up on heart pieces too, so it's definitely worthwhile to take your time to do some of these. With that said and done, let's head into the dungeon. Welcome to the Arbiter's Grounds, a dungeon steeped in a dark and bloody history which is reflected in its ambience. What Oru described to us as a prison only scratches the surface of the implicit history here. For one thing, while it certainly acted as a place to house criminals for a time, this seems to have been something it was repurposed for, not its original design. In fact, the architecture implies that this place was of Gerudo origin. There are several statues of the Gerudo sand goddess, Gerudo script scrawled across the walls, and strange carvings and symbols that seem to depict some ancient conflict. The architecture here, with its beiges and browns and this general sense of enveloping darkness, is without a doubt rooted in the Gerudo tribe. Yet the Gerudo are nowhere to be found. What this means for those people is somewhat of a mystery, but this place was definitely repurposed by the Hylian royal family, who plastered their own royal crest all over the place and erected statues that are distinctly masculine, therefore not of Gerudo origin.
Some believe this to be a captured fortress after some Gerudo-Hylian civil war, but nothing is confirmed. Some believe that this place is even Gerudo Fortress, or the Spirit Temple itself, having been remodeled and repurposed.
In many ways, the Arbiter's Grounds is a return to form in its dungeon design, taking a lot of progressional cues from dungeons like the Spirit and Forest Temples from Ocarina of Time. We have a prominent central room from which the entire dungeon's paths branch out from, and once more there are no NPCs to handhold us throughout it. And like the Forest Temple of Ocarina of Time, and in some ways the Lakebed Temple here, the progression structure overall is rather objective-based. We have a clear understanding of what we need to do to make it through here, as these Poes come to steal the flames from these torches in much the same manner as Ocarina of Time's Forest Temple. So in structure, it's very similar, as we have to crisscross this central room and its adjoining areas to find these 4 Poes. Then in the dungeon's second act, we can see a glimpse of the ascent up towards the boss room and the boss key on a ledge out of reach, forcing us to go the long way around to get it. In some ways, we can view the Arbiter's Grounds as being 2 dungeons in one, with 2 distinct dungeon progressions. The first, where we have to hunt down the 4 Poes, crisscrossing this main central room, which is the unraveling, interconnected dungeon style that I'm so fond of. The second being the gauntlet style approach towards the boss key, which in a way is like a massive loop with very little backtracking. So in that sense, we really have the best of both worlds here, and neither section overstays its welcome, making this one of the series' best dungeons in terms of its overall pacing.
As was the case with the Lakebed Temple, the map seems to be pretty confusing at a glance. There are again 6 floors, but some of these floors are pretty much just isolated rooms, and because the dungeon is divided into these 2 distinct sections, you really don't have to keep track of too much of the map all at once, which makes it far less stressful in practice than it appears. It's a pretty lengthy dungeon as well, though navigation isn't necessarily going to be a problem due to the way it seals off many doors or constantly gives you the keys you need in the same rooms as the locked doors. That said, it isn't without its own individual challenges.
Other aspects I particularly love about the design of this place is how it balances the use of Link's two forms. This is the first dungeon since we gained the ability to transform at will, and so it rightly makes good use of both our Hylian and wolf form abilities. For example, there are many puzzles and combat situations in which our Hylian form is better suited, as we can use many of the tools in Link's arsenal. Then there are situations such as tracking down these Poes, in which our wolf senses will be invaluable. Not just because you can see the scent trails that the Poes leave behind, but also because the Poes themselves must be battled in wolf form, since Link can't even see them as a Hylian. So far up until now, the game has kept all of its Wolf Link related sections separate from its dungeons, which in turn were completed exclusively in Hylian form, so it's refreshing for the game to combine these elements here. The music is pretty minimalist and creepily ambient, which is pretty well par for the course for Twilight Princess so far. Though as was the case for the Lakebed Temple when compared to the Water Temple's theme, the music for Arbiter's Grounds has instrumentation that reflects the Spirit Temple from Ocarina of Time, but rather than being robust and full sounding, it is a decayed, hollow reflection of that track. Whether this was our pal Koji Kondo trying to hint at or draw a connection to these two locations isn't known. It could be he just felt that the instrumentation and overall vibe of the track was a good fit for this location, and he'd be right. There's something about this track that just embodies a deserted desert temple filled with the undead. It's perfect. Alright, let's talk progression. The dungeon starts us in this foyer room, which is flooded with sink sand. There's some Moldorms in here that we can kill by yanking them out of the sand with the claw shot, and we can use the claw shot and some tricky jumping to make our way to the other end of the room. The path forward is gated shut, but we can find this chain switch off to the side, which will open it. Heading up the ramp, we'll come up to a locked door. There's also a vat of lantern oil here, so make sure to stock up, and in this side room we'll find a chest with our first key. Just watch out for this swarm of creepy bugs. Ugh, don't touch me. Ugh.
Spending that key on the locked door, we'll next enter this dark, empty hallway. Again, the door is gated shut, so we'll need to scope out the room to find out how to open it. There are a lot of these stall child enemies as well, but they're easy enough to dispatch. We'll find a pair of torches, one on either side of the door, and lighting them opens the gate.
This brings us into the dungeon's central room. We'll see 4 torches lit with blue flames near the opposite end of the room. And as we approach it, we'll see the 4 Poe sisters appear, snatch up the flames, and scatter. This also causes the north hallway to lock shut. One of the Poes remains behind, so we can fight her in wolf form. We've already battled some Poes outside of the dungeon, so the method is the same. Just leap at them when they glow, and then just rip their soul right out. We'll see the flame that the Poe stole will now be returned to its torch, and we can learn the Poe's scent, which will allow us to sniff out the other Poes. From this central room are a few doors, but before we go through any of them, make sure to open this chest to the side of the stairs, which contains the dungeon map, nice and early. On the opposite side of the stairs is another chest, which has a piece of heart as well.
Alright, now that we have the Poe's scent, we can track them down. There's 2 doors we can go through. If we head into the eastern door, we'll find ourselves in this round room with only a locked door. The western room is likewise a dead end, though there is some cash to grab. Instead, we'll need to follow this scent trail and dig in this spot to uncover a chain switch. Pulling it reveals a hidden staircase leading to a secret third door, which takes us into this round basement room directly under the other eastern room. We'll find a rotating mechanism here, which opens up a side alcove. There's a Gibdo guarding a treasure chest, so be careful fighting it. But then we can open the chest, which gives us our first small key. We can actually claw shot through an opening in the ceiling to return to the upstairs room, but since we use the rotating mechanism, we'll find that the locked door is blocked off, and a hidden side door is now revealed. Heading in there, we'll find a small area where we can challenge the second Poe sister. 2 down, 2 to go.
Alright, now let's drop back into the basement room and use that rotating mechanism to return the room to its previous state. Then we can head back upstairs and spend that key we found on the locked door in the upper eastern room. This is another room mostly flooded with sink sand, and there are some booby traps to watch out for as we make our way across these platforms. We can pull out this cage and push it into this groove in the floor, which creates this nice stretch of ground that we can use to pull this long chain switch. This raises the chandelier out of the way so we can cross the room and head up the stairs. We'll arrive at another room with a rotating mechanism, but before you use it, make sure to open this chest with the compass. Using the rotating mechanism opens up two side alcoves here. To the west is a locked door, so heading east instead, we'll find another chest guarded by a Gibdo. This has the key we need, so we can now spend it and head through the door. This hallway is infested with enemies, including Style Children and Gibdos, so tread carefully. If we use our wolf senses here, we'll find another hidden chain switch, which will open a secret door where the third Poe is hiding. Once the Poe is defeated, we can move on to the next room. There is, again, a locked door, but the chest with the key is just at the side of the room here. Once we open it, however, the lights will dim and we'll find Link suddenly weighted down. If we transform into wolf form, we'll see Midna react to something on us. And sure enough, if we use our wolf senses, we'll see, oh god, it's rat ghosts. Once you've gotten rid of them, we can spend that key on the locked door. We'll emerge onto the second floor balcony of the main central room. We can use the chandelier to hop across to the opposite balcony and head through the upper western door. This takes us back into that western room, but now on the second floor, naturally. We can move that cage we saw previously, opening a shortcut back to here from the central room, and by pushing it into this groove, we once again have a stretch to use to pull this chain. To pull this chain and raise the chandelier. There is a chest across the room here, but it just contains a Miiverse stamp, so, you know, whatever. Otherwise, we can let the chandelier drop around us, and from the middle of it, we can climb up and jump across to the next door. We'll find ourselves in this gear-shaped room where we'll encounter our first Stalfos, a familiar returning enemy. We can use a variety of sword techniques on him, but just make sure to bomb the body to truly defeat it. We'll find a handful of goodies in the side alcoves of the room, including two chests with bombs if you need them. Otherwise, we can head through the next door and move on.
We'll emerge in this room with a large sand goddess statue. There's a simple torch lighting puzzle here to open the next door, through which we'll finally find the fourth Poe sister. This one battles slightly differently. She'll deploy 3 decoys, but you'll be able to see the real one when she glows. A definite callback to the final sister from the Forest Temple. With all 4 of them defeated, we can now head back to the central room. Thankfully, the next door provides a nice shortcut for us. With all 4 torches lit again, the gate into the next section will now open.
Through the gate, we'll emerge into a branching room. We can see a glimpse of the next room through a crack in the wall, but the rotating mechanism that we need to open it appears to be broken. So the north path is blocked. The western path is also blocked by a pit of sink sand, but we can see the chest with the boss key just out of reach, teasing us. So the only way we can go is down the eastern path. There's something of a long vertical shaft here with a rotating mechanism that doubles as an elevator. At the very bottom is the next door, which is locked, but we can find the key by checking through the various alcoves in this room. This one near the bottom has the chest that we're looking for. Spending that key takes us into a large, deteriorated room. There's a lot of spike traps and sink sand, so you have to be careful navigating in here. The door is again sealed, blocked by a stone slab, much like one we saw back in Goron Mines, and pulling this chain will temporarily open it. I recommend using wolf form for this section, as the ghost rats will latch onto us, and Wolflink also runs faster, making that race against time a little bit easier. We'll pass through this hallway filled with blade traps, bugs, and then we'll find Uku. This is the farthest into the dungeon that we've ever found her, which is a bit odd, but hey, there she is.
Through the next door, we'll find a spinning blade trap. There's a gated off section in this alcove, which we can't head through yet, so instead we can jump down into the next section of the room and battle these Stalfos. Their defeat triggers that gate to open, so we can proceed up this hallway using the claw shot, and we'll reach this door which was on a ledge out of reach.
This takes us to the dungeon's mid-boss fight, which like Uku, is found strangely late into the dungeon. We'll find a mysterious sword planted into the floor of the room, secured with ropes adorned with what looked to me to be Ofura. Real-world Ofuda are, generally speaking, a talisman usually made of paper or wood and meant for protection. We actually see Ofuda like this in Kakariko Village in Breath of the Wild, but in this case I don't see it likely that the Ofuda here is protecting the sword per se, but perhaps more meant to protect others from the sword. Cutting even a single rope causes dark energy to burn away all the rest, effectively undoing the seal that contained this evil entity. The sword seemingly moves and attacks you on its own, but using our wolf senses, we can see a huge evil spirit is actually wielding the blade. This is Death Sword, and he's my favorite mid-boss in the game.
Death Sword's origins are unknown as of yet, but based on the fact that Arbiter's grounds was originally a prison for Hyrule's worst criminals, and the Ofuda here keeping the blade sealed, it's not a leap to assume that this was some evil spirit or even the spirit of an evil person who was imprisoned here with their evil weapon. Having spirits tied to swords is a reoccurring theme in the series as well. That said, there's little known about Death Sword, and that mystery is part of the appeal of it all, in my opinion.
Striking him causes him to turn visible briefly, so we can attack him more head-on in Hylian form. While he flies around the room, we can also snipe him with our bow, grounding him and leaving him vulnerable to attack. Otherwise, if we wait for him to strike and avoid his attack successfully, then we'll have ourselves an opening in his defense through which to strike.
Once defeated, the sword will explode and the spirit will sort of disintegrate into a swarm of bugs that flee. This rewards us with the dungeon item, the spinner.
The spinner is a really unique item, allowing us to balance on it and ride along these rails. Sadly, as cool as it is somewhat underutilized in the game in general. But as far as this dungeon goes, it will be put to good use here. Alright, we can head back to the previous room where we'll immediately find some rails to try the new item out on. This takes us to a different ledge with a new door to head through. We'll emerge in this enormous room with a large sand goddess statue overlooking the place. There's something of a maze of spinner tracks to use here, and as confusing as it all seems at a glance, when we're actually going, it's really just one long linear path to take that just happens to crisscross around the room. There's a couple of optional chests around here as well, with some cash, bombs, a stamp, and this one with a piece of heart. We can ride the spinner tracks around the room, and we'll eventually find ourselves at this long stretch with some blade traps to avoid. We'll have to carefully cross the gap, avoiding the blade traps as we do. It's a bit tricky if your timing isn't right, but thankfully if we take a hit and fall, we aren't set too far back. Once we make it across, we can head through the next door, and we'll find we've actually been looped around to the chest with the boss key. Now we can cross that gap and use the spinner in that rotating mechanism that was broken to turn the stone wall blocking the northern path. Then we can use the tracks to ascend up this massive spiraling room, use the spinner in this mechanism to raise a new set of tracks, and finally, riding up to the top of the room takes us to the boss door.
Turbo Champion.
We'll emerge in a huge, mostly empty room, which contains only the remains of some large beast. A mass of weapons embedded in the skull of this beast implies that it was the center of some great conflict, potentially even the one depicted on the wall carvings. Zant will appear wielding a great blade, thrusting it into the beast and filling it with shadow energy, which brings it to life.
This is Star-Lord, one of the game's most iconic bosses. This battle is sort of brilliant for a few reasons. For one, the scope of it is just plain impressive. We have faced some big baddies so far, but Star-Lord is among the biggest we've ever seen. His entire bottom half is still buried beneath the sand, but even just this exposed top half of the beast towers over us. Of course, I've said it before, size isn't everything. It also helps that his design is legitimately intimidating, you know, unlike some other giant, massive bosses that I can think of. His design is equal parts awesome and intimidating. I also appreciate that this battle shies away somewhat from the established structure. The usual flow of using the dungeon item to stun the boss and then attacking it with your sword is thrown out. Instead, this battle is all about quick, precise navigation. We have to ride the spinner tracks around the room, avoid the blade traps, weave between these undead soldiers that are protecting Star-Lord, and quite literally break his spine. Overall, it's not too difficult, but it's certainly a spectacle and a great change of pace.
Once we've done this 3 times, the sand will drain from the room, and we'll have a moment where the game psychs us out, before Star-Lord initiates the second phase of the fight. This part of the battle actually does follow the typical item stun, then sword attack formula, but it still manages to shake things up a bit by framing the battle as a sort of pursuit. Star-Lord will avoid us and shoot back at us while we ride the rails here. We'll have to avoid the blade traps again, and when we catch up to him, hit him with the spinner to ground him. This opens him up for an attack with your sword, so seize the moment and deliver the pain.
Again, this isn't the most difficult fight, but man is it different from anything this game has done before, and the whole air of pursuit is executed so well. It's just a rush the whole time. In some ways, having the fight framed as a chase scene set in a large loop like this does remind me of the Got fight from Majora's Mask, but something about using the spinner to climb these rails while avoiding the blade traps is just so exhilarating. A quick side note, but the music here is a great, bombastic remix of the fire boss fight theme from Ocarina of Time, which we had heard when battling King Dodongo and Volvagia. But this time it's got this great, prominent percussion which greatly enhances the chase scene mood of the fight. It's brilliant stuff. Once Star-Lord is defeated, Xant's blade will explode into our heart container and a bridge will extend. We'll emerge onto the roof of the dungeon and discover the mirror chamber. There's some shadow beasts to defeat, and then using the spinner mechanism on top of the sand goddess will reveal what we're looking for, the Mirror of Twilight. Except it's broken. But we'll get into that next time. So that's the dungeon. The Arbiter's Grounds is one of the game's most iconic dungeons. You'll frequently hear people cite it as being among their favorites, and for good reason, though it's certainly guilty of having its keys in the same rooms as its locked doors. It almost doesn't matter because everything else the dungeon does, it does right. The dark, tense atmosphere, the hollow, decayed music, the implicit history in its architecture, the balance in design ideas, the use of both wolf and Hylian form, and its stellar mid-boss and boss battles alike are all top tier. While I don't think it has much of a navigational challenge compared to the Lakebed Temple, due in part to how it places its locks and keys in the same rooms, the dungeon still presents a slew of other individual challenges, particularly with its combat, and wraps it all up in a blanket of dark ambience. It's filled with the creepy undead. You never know what will be around the next corner, and it just puts you on edge the whole time.
In many ways, it feels like a hybrid of the Shadow and Spirit Temples from Ocarina of Time, but with the Forest Temple's post-sisters thrown in the mix. Though I mean that in the best way possible. They combined all of the elements that work so well in those dungeons and made them so streamlined and coherent here. Nothing feels out of place, despite its inspiration being drawn from so many sources.
But in my opinion, where the Arbiter's Grounds truly excels is its feeling of implicit history. Every room room, every wall, every statue of this place just gives off this ancient feeling of having this rich, deep history that is just out of our reach. Every time I set foot in this place, I can't help but want to know more about its origins. Just what happened here? How did this go from a Gerudo place of worship to a Hylian prison? Where did Death's Sword and Star-Lord come from, and what did it take to defeat and imprison them here? Sadly, we don't have a canon explanation for many of these questions, but in some respects, it's almost better that way. There's a lot of room for theorizing and speculating, and that mystery is part of the charm of this place. The Arbiter's Grounds is my personal favorite dungeon in Twilight Princess, and while the dungeons before and after it certainly aren't bad, there's just something so spectacular about this dark, foreboding place. And before we sign off, I just want to give a huge thank you to my friend RMFH for joining me on this video. And if you're looking for more awesome Zelda content, make sure to go check his channel out.
Thanks for having me on, Cap. I really enjoyed myself today. If you all would like to check out my channel, just search up RMFH. I talk about various Zelda topics over on the channel, so I'm sure you'll find something you enjoy.
Make sure to go check his channel out. I've got links in the description below, and thank you all for watching. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for watching this video. I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you to the lovely people who supported me on Patreon, as well as my channel members, particularly those who supported at the cheese level or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, Justin, Callie, Finley, Greymage, Hylian Historian, Gale, and Ethan3G. Thank you so much for the support, you guys, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.